Six. What page? 7. Okay, I'm bored. I don't know what else to say, man. Sadly, that is true of a lot of stories. I end up getting bored of what I read, and it's just a sad case of seeing what can work and what doesn't. In a lot of ways, when new writers are making their first fully fledged story, or hell, even just making another story, a lot of books, as you've seen in that intro, honestly feel boring. Now, in the terms of a general audience, they don't mind it. As long as you can get the audience intrigued based on the idea you're getting across, then it doesn't matter. But in the case of just keeping an audience, what you want out of your story to make sure people can read it front all the way to back, we have to see what works and what doesn't. And several mistakes form from these first 10 pages. As you saw in that intro, while I can sit through several pages, it takes a while to fully intrigue myself in the story or book you're trying to tell. And here is the easiest ways to fix all those mistakes, not just as an avid reader, but to also understand how to hook an audience seamlessly your first 10 pages alone. If you don't know me, I'm Arnel Arcega. I'm one of the healthiest writers you'll ever meet. As an author, writer, and motivator, I make sure people stay on this path of self-improvement so they can stay and do well in the life they're given. If you want help in your own writing projects, you can check me out on my Instagram down below. Along with my other socials, you can see what I can do to personally help you with what you have. For now, let's get into the 7 mistakes new authors make when writing their first 10 pages. As I've explained in that hook, the first major thing you want to understand is figuring out the hook. More specifically, lacking a defining hook. Now, when new authors try to make a new hook, they try to go all grandiose on one agenda. This is because they've seen thousands of stories explaining how to hook an audience in, when in all actuality, the hook is more simpler than I thought. Case in point, this video. I tried to make that skit at the beginning a lot more longer and more intense in terms of what I was reading. But in the case of just getting across what I want to an audience, likewise a YouTube video to a book, it doesn't have to be that complex. For instance, you could start a story or a non-fictional excerpt somewhere in between a scene. Start it out explaining how the details form out. Start it explaining the scene itself and then forming the action stuff along with it. Now, this is important to understand simply because there's a lot of information required that would take so much exposition to get into, which I'll explain later. In case of just explaining a hook, your hook has to be the defining reason you make people read. One of the most notable examples here is a book called Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. In all honesty, it's one of my least favorite books I personally read, and yet it has a fantastic hook, setting up our 2 main leads, allowing them to see where they can go off from there. It's a fantastic intro to an otherwise subpar book, but I can still use this example simply because it starts out with our main leads going in a car. It explains what time the setting is, and it just gets right to the point. That's my biggest advice on getting a hook, and it doesn't have to be so much. I know many authors try to set up the right tone and the right idea, but in the first 10 pages, your first page also counts in those 10 pages. And elaborating on what can work in that hook will allow your story to be more defined and more limitless in what's possible from there. The second thing you need to understand, especially when making your fully fledged book, is too much exposition. This is a statement that many authors understate, but it's one that I feel is especially needed in the first 10 pages. Now, exposition is one of those that would take up so much time and patience to fully understand. And this is a good point to get across simply because exposition is just that. It's explaining a lot of the information required. Exposition can either be one of the most entertaining parts of your story or the most boring and jaw-droppingly awful parts. In terms of just getting what you want across, exposition will always be needed, no matter if it's the beginning or the end of the story. But going to the first 10 pages, it's best to see where we can develop the idea from there. Exposition just involves explaining your characters and your settings, and having too much of it doesn't allow the story to shine. Going back to that hook idea I mentioned in mistake 1, it's good to see where we can develop the exposition from there. As it stands, we want your hook to be simple. At the same time, we want the exposition to be there and thoroughly explain. It follows the hook. You start out with the hook, setting up the idea, and the exposition is just explaining the action scene involved. Going back to trust exercise, the exposition is simply using the environment that the characters are in, the high school they go to, the time, the season, etc. It's a great point to see where we can get the information while making sure we can teeter and balance off what is needed. Mistake number 3. Now this is the complete opposite of too much exposition. Having too much dialogue is another mistake many new authors create when writing their first 10 pages. When explaining how too much dialogue can work, it's just writing a borderline script. The difference between a script and a book is that with a book we can see the ideas. No matter if it's first person, third person omnipresent, or third person limited, we can see where it can work out. And even if you're the weird guy writing second person point of view, we could still have too much dialogue in the case of just showcasing one idea to another. If I want to use a more internet term, we don't want to create a fanfic. We do not. We want to create a fully fledged original idea in a book. And using that information, allowing yourself to explain what you want out of this book, it needs to be a balance of the exposition and dialogue. The easiest way I can balance off of this both is by thinking of a river. You are at the top of the river and your audience is at the bottom. The stream is the words and phrases you're captivating them in explaining what you want to tell. And this is important because allowing your story to shine will need to have the right balance of exposition and dialogue. For this point, we need to not think too much on it. You still have plenty of story to tell. And in the case of just getting through the first 10 pages, we need your audience to trudge through this new world, whether it's a non-fictional excerpt or a fictional world that will allow them to stay connected in what they can be. But as it stands, there's plenty of ways to hook your audience in, not just through the physical hook, the exposition, and the dialogue. Mistake number 4, case in point, is the lack of entertainment value. Your book, no matter what kind of book you're writing, even if it's a damn informational text, needs to be entertaining. No matter what you're writing, whether it's informational or just setting up some sort of comedy, romance, whatever genre you're thinking about, the story or information needs to be entertaining enough to be explained. If you want a case of that similar effect, take a look at how fiction works. It's one of those entertaining pieces that allows me to see how so much details can work for a story for better and worse while still feeling entertaining in the world it's trying to tell. And that's why I feel so effective in explaining this point of the mistakes. The first 10 pages of how fiction works straight up just goes to the most random information that doesn't even matter, the preface of sorts, and allowing that information to in a way hook your audience in somehow makes the book all the more entertaining. No matter what you're experiencing, whether it's a YouTube video, an informational and educational piece, you want to be hooked in as an audience. And this is something I educate to many of my writers and authors out there. For that entertainment value, you have to use that same hook. One of the easiest advice I use is the pink elephant syndrome. No matter what, this is a syndrome that will need to be used throughout your entire book. And the pink elephant, case in point, is one of those where it needs to be something so elusively confusing that it works in your story. In the case of trust exercise, the pink elephant syndrome is one of those where it's just the theater class. It's the main teacher, and it's how that can influence our two main leads. In my own book, which you can check out in the link of the description, Artist v Critic, the pink elephant is the robot involved. Now, this is something that will take a lot of explanation, but you can check it out in the link down below if you want to see what I mean. Both the robot involved as well as the brotherly connection allows that entertainment value to be increased simply from the first 10 pages. This is a great point to understand, as books that lack that entertainment value tend to have less audiences. Remember, your book is fun. It has to be something that will allow your audience to grow, whether it's fictional or non-fictional. So use that information to tell something that's both informational, educational, but all around entertaining. The fifth mistake many new authors and writers create when forming the first 10 pages is simply the lack of motivation. Now, this is something I'd say you have the personal control as an author. The first 10 pages are what determine if your book works out. In my own next project, I have been struggling with the first 10 pages I have been making, and yet I managed to swing by simply by motivation. I don't like how many people, specifically writers, don't use the fact of motivation correctly. What I mean is that they say you have to be disciplined enough. You have to use that information you earn so that you could tell the story you want. And while that's great, motivation feels good. I know I used to say in the past that motivation is one of those where it just stings, but you have to be disciplined enough to stick with it. And while that is true, the lack of motivation to tell your story determines if these first 10 pages are even formed in the first place. Why would you write a story that doesn't even have the interest to be good by the first 10 pages? This is important enough because if you get those first 10 pages across, the rest of the story will develop. It will be a fantastic case of storytelling simply by your own control and discipline. And this comes with the motivation to write this story. Make it intriguing enough. Energize that story, that passionate drive to tell something that's out of this world. Whether it's informational or fictional or even a poetry book, it's all determined and up to you. And this will allow you to write the story you want to tell. The sixth mistake many new authors and writers cultivate towards when writing their first 10 pages is the lack of trust. This is one that I feel many people don't look over, as these final few points are more on what you can control. The first four are something that can be objectively seen, but in the case of just explaining what you can tell and how you can explain it to an audience, you need to trust them even in the first 10 pages. It's good to see this, especially when you're starting out. It's great to have a foundation built on trust based on what you can write and explain. You don't want your book in the trash like I showed out earlier. What you need to do in allowing your audience to be trusting is to write in your own words. Be confident in what you're explaining. And by then you'll have an audience fully hooked and wrapped around your story. If you can tell what you want while explaining it in a manner that can be read no matter how old or young the audience is, then I guarantee, I'm telling you, this story will be fantastic. No matter what. If it's good in just the first foundation, the first 10 pages, then it will be a fantastic read even throughout the whole journey ahead. The seventh and final mistake you need to understand, especially in the first 10 pages, this is the biggest point I want to leave you off with. And this is the one I guarantee will determine if the book will even finish or not. The seventh mistake is the lack of engagement. The purpose of your book has to have a specific purpose and mean. My books, A Small World Smiles and Artist v Critic, are some of those examples where I strive towards a specific audience. They obviously aren't going to be the same book. However, they can go for a specific purpose in explaining what I want. The same case applies with my third project, The Winning Complex. And using favorite and all-time great stories like The Book Thief or the Hunger Games trilogy, there are plenty of cases in which the engagement, the purpose of that said story, allows the book to shine. In the case of The Book Thief, explaining the World War allows the story to shine out and allows the message of death to linger on throughout. And the same case applies with every single book that exists, no matter if it's just explaining how fiction works or even just talking about how to get better questions. The purpose of your said story will allow it to shine out no matter if it's just the first 10 pages. The engagement you gain from those first 10 pages will allow your story to not only be more effective in what you're telling, but it will allow your story to shine no matter how far you can come along. Keeping it all in mind, my biggest and final advice, if you want to be more purposeful of what you're trying to explain, is to simply create something that's passionate enough and that requires a solution. Think of a problem. Think of a creative, solid problem that the world is facing right now. Climate change, pollution, the violence, or even just political topics that I don't have the power to explain. You know of the problems of the world. What you have to do then, as the viewer and writer you are, is to start solving that problem no matter where you are. Solve it in the best way you can and use the language you can speak to explain what you can tell. That is what I explain is the greatest way to develop your own purpose. No matter what it is, it's not just your purpose, it's your contribution and your engagement with your said story that will allow this, something like a small journal, to become a bestseller of all time. One of the all-time greats next to The Hunger Games or even 1984 for that matter. Use that motivation in mind and continue writing in a manner that will allow you to feel passionate. You're at the top, your audience is at the bottom, so streamline that river the best way you can. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you can take in all the advice I've given out as a new author and writer. If you want to truly see what I mean by my first several books and what I used in the first 10 pages, you can check them out in the link down below. Along with my other socials, you can see what I do and how I can personally help you out from there. With all that said, keep on reading, keep on writing, and take care.